because I'm really not a speaker. I'm just devorah shaindel, and I work in preschool, so I'm used to everybody being on the floor together, and I just want to be able to see everybody here. So, good evening. So today was Vav Tishrei, and it's the rebbetzen Chana's yartzeit. There's many, many lessons that we can learn from the rebbetzen Chana. Rebbetzen Chana is our mother, the mother of royalty. She's the mother of our Rebbe, our beloved Rebbe. The Rebbe teaches us that on a yartzeit, we living take it to heart. So what does that mean? It means that we look at the person's life and we think about the service that they performed in their life and the lessons that we can learn from them. And we also think about how that person continues to make an impact on the living today. So there are many, many lessons that we can take from the rebbetzen Chana, aside from Machon Chana. And I don't know if you've had the opportunity to read the book Mother of Royalty. Last year, her memoirs came out in installments. They are fascinating, thrilling, inspiring. It's a must-read. There's so many lessons that we can take from rebbetzen Chana. Just a few that struck me to start with. Her selfless dedication to her husband and his Torah writings. Upon hearing that Rabbi Levi Yitzchak had been arrested, she immediately sprang into action. She didn't allow herself any time of confusion or worry or what should we do. She immediately went from prison to prison trying to locate him. She was not concerned for her own personal well-being. She immediately was thinking, how can she help her husband and how can she find him? Her dignity and her humility in the face of terrible hardship. Rebbetzen Chana chose to join her husband in exile in this far, remote, primitive place in Kazakhstan. And she writes in her memoirs the horrible conditions that they lived under. The rebbetzen and the Rav were forced to share a very primitive one-room dwelling. They were always looking for a place to stay. Dwelling, that was one of their biggest problems, in addition to food. And they were always had to scramble to find a place to even live. And so at one point they were sharing a one-room, primitive mud hut dwelling with the crude people there. And she was forced to go out, and she wasn't forced, but because of the force of circumstances, she went out and she gathered straw and grass just to make a fire so that she could boil muddy water to make tea for her ill husband. And she did this with dignity and humility. And then I think about her courage as she transitioned in her life after the passing of her renowned husband. Here she was in this remote place in Russia. She was a bereft widow without her family close by. And she had to, she immigrated. She found her way. She did not allow her emotions to take over. She did what she needed to do in order to immigrate from Russia. And not only that, with great personal sacrifice, she could have been in prison, killed for smuggling out her husband's writings, but she did. She smuggled out her husband's Torah teachings. And then she met up with her son, our Rebbe, in Paris, and he wasn't the Rebbe yet, and he brought her to New York. But I think about her coming to New York. What changes and challenges she must have felt coming. Of course, she was with her son, the Rebbe, but she was without her husband. It was a whole new country, a whole new language, a whole new way of life. All the adjustments that she had to make in her life. But rebbetzen Chana approached everything that came into her life with courageous action, dignity, and grace. So as Sarah Chana said, Mrs. Lapkowski asked me to share with you my own personal story of how the rebbetzen Chana, through Machon Chana, has transformed my life, so that's what I'll start with now. 1952, and now you forget how old I am. 1952, I was born, devorah shaindel, Deborah Jean. That was just 2 years after the Rebbe had accepted the mantle of leadership as the seventh Rebbe, and the world Jewry was in chaos. The world wars and the Holocaust had virtually almost extinguished Jewish life, and the Rebbe assumed leadership for world Jewry. The Rebbe was very busy and with his mission, with his vision of rebuilding world Jewry after the destruction of the world wars and the Holocaust. The Rebbe had the vision, and he was laying the foundation for Am Yisrael to greet Mashiach. But I knew nothing of that. I grew up in the Midwestern town of Alton, Illinois, which is right on the banks of the Mississippi River, right on the border of Missouri. You kind of picture a Huckleberry Finn type of town. Yes, I did go fishing on the river, and I used to explore the caves and the river bluffs. I didn't know anything that was happening in New York. I had no vision of a shared Jewish destiny of Am Yisrael. What I knew was green, grassy lawns, Halloween parades, and the 4th of July. 4th of July was my favorite, and one of my most fond childhood memories is of our family piling into the car on a hot summer night, driving down to the riverside, sitting on the hood of the car, watching the fireworks display over the river. That was the ultimate. I was brought up as a proud American in the land of opportunity. My mother's parents had barely escaped the pogroms of the Ukraine, and they virtually came, my grandmother virtually came with clothes on her back to this country. Her relatives brought her to the Midwest, and my father's family immigrated to the Midwest also. They were Jewish peddlers. They started off as fur traders, junk peddlers, and scrap metal. And they came to the Midwest because the Midwest offered great opportunity for Jewish immigrants. The Midwest offered opportunities for economic security, for a sense of survival, and a chance to integrate into normal life. My father's family did establish a small Jewish community in Alton, Illinois, and the community was very close-knit. It was mainly cousins and family members. But our Jewishness was something that we celebrated at home or in our Reform temple. And I remember that in the 3rd grade, I learned about the melting pot. You ever studied the melting pot in American history? Well, I remember my teacher teaching about the melting pot, and I had this vision in my mind of this big pot on top of this roaring fire, and all different kinds of people being dropped into that melting pot and just like melting away. And I remember I asked my mother about this. What's with the melting pot? And she said, "Oh, the melting pot. That means that in America, everyone is the same." Well, I didn't feel the same as everyone else in Alton, Illinois. When I was growing up, I did not have any Jewish friends. My only friends that were Jewish were my cousins. We did celebrate basic Jewish traditions and holidays together with my cousins and my family, as I said, but that was it. And I had the responsibility of explaining to my teachers why I would not attend school on Rosh Hashanah, why I wouldn't attend school on Yom Kippur. And my friends asked me, "Why don't you eat bread on Passover? And is it really true that you killed?" Yeah. I didn't have answers. I didn't have answers for them. I knew I was Jewish, and I was proud of it, but I also had a lot of confusion. And I often thought, why don't my parents let me go to those holiday celebrations at public school? And why does the gym teacher always team me up with the black kids when we have sports? How come my friends, my so-called friends, call me Dirty Jew when they get angry at me? I was confused. I didn't have answers. I didn't know. The rebbetzen Chana writes in her memoirs of the years in exile together with her husband, the Rav Levi Yitzchak. She writes of the terrible hunger and starvation that they endured. She writes that the pangs of hunger were so great that she would squeeze her hands and tremble. And yet she was pleased with herself that she had self-control, and she did not lower herself to begging for bread. She writes how she observed how hunger can debase a person so low that their conduct can become so low just for a piece of bread, just to satisfy the pains of hunger. Well, growing up in the Midwest without Yiddishkeit, I also felt hungry. It wasn't physical hunger, but it was a spiritual hunger. I used to feel an ache in my being, and I'm sure that everybody in this room has felt that ache, maybe some more than others. It's an ache that was always there, and I didn't know what. I didn't know why. I didn't understand it, but there was this ache. And the older I got, the ache got stronger. And it's true that sometimes, in order to satisfy that ache, one's conduct becomes very low. Well, Midwestern college campuses in the early 70s was not the best place to try to satisfy that spiritual ache. But unknown to me, the Rebbe in 770 was busy sending out his shluchim all over the world. Before rebbetzen Chana's passing in 1964, she said in an interview with Yiddish Shehem, she said how she admired the young religious girls of today who are being taught the same values and ideas as the young men. She said how wonderful it is when a wife has a good Jewish education and can discuss Torah intelligently with her husband, and they can share together the same values and aspirations. Rebbetzen Chana's endorsement of Jewish education for young women transformed the world. Perhaps it was her words that put the seed for Machon Chana. There wasn't, in those days, as Sarah Chana said, the seekers. There was the idea of providing a yeshiva for young men who wanted to learn more. But the Machon Chana was the first who had the idea, the concept, that Jewish education for women with little or no background could become a reality. And in 1972, Machon Chana was established. Perhaps it was rebbetzen Chana's words, these words, that gave the Rebbe the appreciation to want to give Machon Chana his mother's name. As we said, and as we know, the Rebbe sent his shluchim out all over the world to look for neshamas like us, like me. And in 1974, 2 years after I met my shluchim, I moved to Crown Heights with Chayel. I came, and I remember walking through the door of Machon Chana, and one of the young women pointed to the picture, the painting of the rebbetzen Chana, and she said, "That's rebbetzen Chana. We are her daughters. And if you learn at Machon Chana, you will also be her daughter." So I decided to stay. That year at Machon Chana, I learned many, many things. I remember my first Chumash class. It was Nechami Greisman, Eliyah Shalom. Nechami Schusterman was my first Chumash teacher. And she taught about Yetzias Mitzrayim. It was phenomenal. I had never heard the concept before. That Hashem chose us. Hashem took us out of Mitzrayim. He did all these amazing nisim for us. And He made us Am Yisrael. He chose us as the Jewish nation. It was my first sense that I belonged to Am Yisrael, that I had a shared destiny with the Jewish people. And that shared destiny was tied up with Hashem. Every day we have the mitzvah to remember Yetzias Mitzrayim, and every day I remember my own personal Yetzias Mitzrayim. I learned how to daven. I was 21 years old, and when I first learned Aleph Beis, and I always believed in Hashem. I always knew that God existed. That was part of that ache of, how do you connect? How do you reach God? How do you pray? And once on my path, it was before I came to Machon Chana, I went to a Shabbos morning minyan who was not Chabad, and I remember sitting behind the curtain, and I could not read Hebrew, and the prayer book was in Hebrew, but I wanted to know, I wanted to connect. So I asked the woman next to me, could you please find me the plate, show me where we are? And she said, you don't need to know, that's for men, girls don't need to know that. And that right then, I vowed, I am going to learn how to read Hebrew and be able to daven from the siddur. And that's what I learned. I came to Machon Chana and I learned how to daven. I learned how to read Hebrew. I learned how to connect with Hashem. In my Hasidus class, I learned that Hashem wants us to make a home for Him in this world, a derech tachtona. I wanted to make a Jewish home. And in my halacha class, I learned how to make a Jewish home, how to live as a Jew. That year, Pesach, Seder night, after Ma'ariv in 770, the Rebbe said, I'm going home. And the Rebbe came to Machon Chana. We, daughters of rebbetzen Chana, were there waiting for the Rebbe. Who was there? In the basement of at the Seder table, waiting for the Rebbe to come. And when the Rebbe came down the stairs to the dining room with the table set so beautifully, the Rebbe said three things. The Rebbe said there should be candles burning on the Yom Tov table. The girls should have silver bechers. And next year, everybody should be making Pesach in their own home. And the next year, I was making Pesach in my own home. My halacha teacher had introduced me to my Hadar Torah Bacher. And
that's
my
full
husband.
Service,
right? So it was before Pesach that year, and I continued even after I got married, and I still continued to go to Machon Chana to learn. And it was before Pesach, and I was learning how to make Pesach. And I remember the rabbi said, he was speaking about the chumras, the stringencies, and he said, well, there are many stringencies, but everyone follows their family tradition. So one young woman raised her hand and she said, but we don't have family traditions. What should we do? He said, in that case, I will teach you how to make Pesach according to Machon Chana. And he taught us the highest stringency. And that's how the daughters of Machon Chana made Pesach. All the chumras. We are truly daughters of the rebbetzen Chana. Machon Chana brides, kalas, are given the great zchus to use the Rebbe's forum. And
everybody else.
What? Every kala. But
you have to consider it Machon Chana for everybody. Just like you said in 770 for the Bacher, you have to Machon Chana for all kalas.
For all kalas, okay. But still, Machon Chana kalas is special. And believe it or not, some of us are even bringing our own daughters as kalas to Machon Chana to use the Rebbe's special forum. What a zchus is that? So it's been 40 years, a blink of an eye, and here I stand before you, Deborah Jean, devorah shaindel, and Baruch Hashem, we've been blessed with a beautiful, beautiful family. So grateful to Hashem, truly nisim. My kids say to me, how God we turn out okay? I said, I don't know. I had no idea what I was doing. So it was the Rebbe's bracha and Hashem's chesed. Many of our children have dedicated their lives to chinuch and to shlichus. And that's the impact of rebbetzen Chana, Chana. Now, my story is not unique. Every person in this room has their story, and they can tell their story of how they've been impacted through the Rebbe and through rebbetzen Chana. All of our stories should be told. I think it's a wonderful thing that you have on the website the stories, and these stories should be told. Maybe someone will make a book and record all of our stories, because the truth is that rebbetzen Chana, through Machon Chana, is transforming lives through every person in this room. When we go out to our communities, when we are role models for our family, we transform lives. So the rebbetzen Chana lives on through us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And before I introduce our next speaker, just one point, which is here I said about the Hashgacha process that gets revealed.
Right.
I came to Crown Heights on Chai Elul 1974.
Really?
That's when I pulled up. So that's the exact same day. And as far as davening goes, I just all of a sudden wanted to share this, and then we'll get on to something really great, which is that I had gone to Hebrew school and Sunday school. I'm not going to tell you I was a very enthusiastic student. It was a conservative with the organ and the choir and the whole bit, and I was just like completely turned off. But I went to a lot of hours of Sunday school and Hebrew school. And yet that first summer in Minnesota, or in Elul time, they started preparing us for davening. My goodness, and we had our oh help me somebody. They didn't have English Hebrew yet, so we had our Hebrew Bible chart and our English Birnbaum and all my little notes and paper clips and signs and arrows. Next to Aleinu, it actually is written in men fall down. I still have that and look at it every year. But on a much more serious note, this whole choreography, and I mean, frankly, with all those years, I didn't have Hebrew skills. And we're going to do this and stand up here and sit down there and do. I was like beside myself. And I remember going to Manas Friedman, Rabbi Friedman, and I said, I'm never going to be able to do all this. I said, I think when Yom Tov comes, when I'm there, all I'm going to be able to do is cry. And he looked at me and he said, if that is all you are able to do, the biggest Hasidim will be jealous. So I think any of us that remember that year with Nakami, and there were a lot of tears. And anyway, Baruch Hashem. So,
can I add something?
Of course.
I just want to say, continuing learning at Machon Chana. So this summer, I had the great split. I was 2 days off, and I attended Mrs. Lieberman's Tefillah class. Wow. So
she has no idea what you're talking about.
So we continue to learn. We have wonderful teachers.
I just want to take a second. I know Sarah Lieberman does not want anybody fawning all over her. So I just want to say that it is really a big plus to have her here to speak with us tonight, and on a personal level, an even bigger plus that I think I could say that she's my friend. So, Sarah.
You want to drink of water? Thank you. I just had Good evening, everyone. When I came in and I heard devorah, I remembered the time I invited devorah to come to my shul. I don't know if you remember, it was around Chav Cheshvan. Our school was smaller. It was a very, very special Chav Cheshvan because for some time the Rebbe had not given out any memorim that he had looked over. And the night before, my father told me that my father was always a printer, that they had just printed a mimer of the Rebbe on Vayiyu Chayei Sarah in honor of Chav Cheshvan, and he's bringing it to my house,
and he knew I always made a farbrengen with my students, and maybe I could share this with my students. So I asked my father if he would do something he never did, if he would come to school and he would teach the mimer. We had Panta Farbrengen, and I had told devorah to talk about Mitzrayim in prison. I think you spoke about that, and you told a little bit of your story. I remember about Missouri and the river. And I was so touched. I came home and I was touched by two things. The fact that we learned a little bit of that special mimer, and that I was privileged to bring someone I know to my students to tell the story of her journey to the Yiddishkeit that many of us who were born into it, perhaps we have to learn how to appreciate it in a different way than you. And you took the words out of my mouth as you spoke first. One of my great pleasures is being it's an honor and a privilege, and I hope I could be everyone's friend, and we could all be friends, and maybe Mashiach will come, and that's chus. Sarah asked me to speak a little bit about women learning, and all I can do is share some of the things that I've come across over the years. Some of them I teach to the girls in Beis Rivka, some of them share with my family, some of them I pick up along the way, and they're all very, very meaningful. So, being that we're Nasaris Yemei Tshuva, and by Chassidim, we're always happy. So I'll start with a vart of the Rebbe Rashab on Simchas Torah. Now, this vart I saw in several places. I saw it repeated in a Sikha. I saw it in the letters of the Frierdiker Rebbe, and there were cross-references, and apparently this vart was repeated different ways in the Idris and in the Sikhas. But the Rebbe Rashab made Kiddush on Simchas Torah, and it happened to be Wednesday. And he said, Heint is Mittwoch, today is Wednesday. Nish jeder Mittwoch kann man also reden. Not every Wednesday can we speak the way we're speaking today. Und nicht jeder Mittwoch kann das also angenommen werden. And not every Wednesday can this be received in the same way. And he said the famous words that just like it's a mitzvah to put on tefillin every day, it's a mitzvah to spend time thinking about the chinuch of one's children. And then the Rebbe Rashab said these words: Bachsidim is nicht kein Unterschied, sie a ben, sie a bas. Bachsidim, when it comes to chinuch, there is absolutely no difference between a daughter and a son, or a son and a daughter. And by Chassidim, it is known that the same energy that went into educating the boys in Torah, in mitzvahs, in halacha, in midas tevas, in chassidus, went into the education of the girls. So I thought I would begin with that, and I'd like to share with you a few interesting things. Around, I don't know how many years ago it is, over 20 for sure, the tishrei came out. It was, I remember the color, it was a rose pink color on the cover. It was an issue that came out in honor of Matan Torah, and there was a picture of the Luchais on the cover in white, and inside there was an article that fascinated me. I read it. It was written by Rabbi Yoshua Dubrovsky under one of his famous pen names, and I was so fascinated. I had never heard anything of this. Whoever I mentioned it to had not heard anything of it. I called Mar Garwitz and I said, we must teach this to our girls. This is the most incredible thing I've ever read. So she said, design a course. So we spent a few years designing this course where we did not really have the material, but we did a lot of calling and asking and researching. The article spoke about a group of girls from Chabad families who lived in Riga in the 1930s. And this group of most Lubavitch Hasidim lived in Russia in those years for different reasons. There were Chabad families in Riga, which was not at all a Hasidic place. It was a Jewish community along the German style. And these girls got together, it did not explain why or anything like that, to study Hasidus. The previous Rebbe was living in Poland, and he had a correspondence with these girls. He set up 3 Hasidim in Riga to be mashpiyim for these girls, And the article was fascinating. It had a picture of each of the mashpiyim. It had a picture of a cover page that said, Igeres Kiyum Nefesh Min Yisrael, a letter about giving life to a Jewish soul from the Rebbe of Lubavitch, sent to the girls of Achos Hatmimim to Riga, 1937. And there were all kinds of other details. There's no time to go into all of them, but it was so fascinating. So I went to school. It was part of something else we were doing. We were learning about the previous Rebbe and the history of that period. I shared it with the girls. I told them that I don't know anything about this other than what I'm telling them. This was the background. At the end of the article, there was a word-for-word account of the yechidus that the previous Rebbe had with these girls, anonymously reported. We studied the yechidus, and there was also a letter to the three mashpiyim telling them how to study Hasidus with these young girls. But in the copy of the letter that the article had, the names of the mashpiyim were missing. Harav, blank, blank, blank. So I shared it with them, and whatever material I could add, I had spoken to Rabbi Levin in the library. He was helpful as much as he could have been at the time. I did not know that this article was full of mistakes because the author had only what he had and was only able to speak to the people who he quoted. In the next issue of the Yiddish Shehem, the mistakes were corrected. There was another letter to the Achos Hatmimim, and I still was not able to figure out what this was all about. But shortly after that, the Rebbe had asked earlier to print the series of letters of the Rabbeim. So we have Igros Kodesh of the Alter Rebbe and of all the Rabbeim, and volume 4 of the letters of the previous Rebbe was, I guess the letters there are from the years 1937, 1938, loaded with correspondence to these girls. So now it became easier to teach it. And I wanted to share with you a few interesting things. I wondered, what is this letter that was sent to the girls of Riga? It said it was a cover page. I'm just sharing things with you to show you how when we learn so many things from each other. I had a student in that class. It happened to be Rivki Slonim. She went home. In those years, the girls would go home and they would repeat what they learned because we didn't have everything we have printed now. We did not have so much of it. We had very little of it in English. And she came back and she said, I showed this to my grandfather, Rabbi Zalman Garani, and he said he knows what it is. Not only does he know what it is, he has a copy of it. And he said it's in a book and I could bring the book to school. Now, I was afraid to take a book that I didn't think anyone had to school and copy it from Rabbi Zalman Garani because things do get lost. And I said, please don't bring it. But she brought it, and I stood near the copy machine. I did not take my eyes off that book. Rabbi Garani did what many Jews in Russia had done. They did not really have Sfarim, but they would collect letters, Maimarim, Sichas, and they would bind them together in books. So he had the cover page of this letter, and he had the actual letter. I did not know that this letter is really in Likutei Devorah. Now it's also in Igros Kodesh. But then someone kindly showed it to me. And it was a letter written to a Jew in America who, under the guidance of Rabbi Yisrael Jacobson, the grandfather of Rabbi Oldtime, got a Jew who he was acquainted with to study Hasidus. And he wrote to the Rebbe in Poland that this Jew, whose name was Mr. Cohn, has begun to study Hasidus. And this letter was a response to this Jew about how great it is to inspire another Jew to Yiddishkeit. I could not understand what does this have to do with the girls of Achos Hatmimim. But then in the Igros Kodesh, Rabbi Levin has all kinds of interesting footnotes. These girls studied Hasidus. Apparently they asked the previous Rebbe if they could call themselves Achos Hatmimim. It was very unusual for girls to study Hasidus in a group in those years. They went to a Jewish school. Rabbi Chabakov happened to be the principal. He was living in Riga of that school. But somehow something inspired them, and one of the letters is printed where the Frierdiker Rebbe says to the Mashpiyim, I got the request of the girls to be called Achos HaTmimim, perhaps sisters to the Tmimim of Temchei Tmimim, and I agree that they could use this name. The Rebbe gave these girls projects in addition to the learning. One of the projects was to translate writings of Hasidus into their language. And that's why this letter was sent to them. What I want to share with you is how chashuv, how important, how special these girls were to the Rebbe. The Rebbe would tell them how to make farbrengens. The Rebbe would tell them what to do with the farbrengens. The Rebbe asked the Mashpiyim that everything that went on at a farbrengen should be recorded by an individual girl who would serve as a recording secretary. The Rebbe writes to the girls, I have all the reports that your Mashpiyim have sent me. And in addition to that, the Rebbe asked that the girls should continue to study Hasidus and they should get others interested. In this article, there is an account of an anonymous report, as I mentioned before, of a Yechidus with the previous Rebbe, but there is no date. But from the context, we figure out the date. And this is one of the most fascinating things I ever learned in my life. And now it's actually printed in the back of Sefer HaSichos of the years of the 1930s. Unfortunately, the war broke out. But in Riga, the Jews were not affected directly by the war in the early years. And they heard that the previous Rebbe is traveling to America through Riga. The previous Rebbe was escaping from the Nazis, and he was able to escape by way of Riga. And they said to their Mashpiyim, these girls hadn't necessarily seen the Rebbe, could it be arranged that when the Rebbe goes through Riga, he could meet with them? And it was arranged. And it seems that one of the Rebbe's secretaries wrote down, word for word, what went on at this Yechidus. And because we know that the Yechidus took place on a certain day of the week, and we know that it took place on Purim Katan, when there were 2 Adars, and we know the Rebbe was traveling to America, we figure out that that's the first Adar of 1940. The Rebbe came here, of course, in the second Adar. And I'd like to repeat some of this Yechidus to you. The first thing the Rebbe said to the girls is that he has the reports of what they're doing, and that he sees that they're making great progress thus far. He hopes that it will continue, and before he tells the girls anything else, he asks for 2 volunteers to repeat in his presence the last 2 Maimorim the girls studied. And in the account we read that one student, her name was Skatlov, these are all families we know in our neighborhood, their relatives. She repeated one Maimer. One Maimer was So Hartasa Lateva and Parshas Noach. And the other girl whose name was Bliner, she had relatives living on my corner in 706 Eastern Parkway, Mr. and Mrs. Bliner. And she repeated the Maimer Lech Lecha. When that was completed, the Rebbe said to the girls, what is the purpose of learning Hasidus? The purpose of learning Hasidus is not to replace the learning of Shulchan Aruch and the observance of Halacha, which every Jewish child must know. The purpose of learning Hasidus is to improve one's midos, is to have a refined character, and to do practical mitzvos with a greater feeling, as Hasidim have always done. Then the Rebbe said, I'm making it a little shorter, but I just want to give you some of the interesting points. That Hasidim have always studied Musar, because Musar teaches one how to have a good character. But they always studied Musar with a Hasidische Gefühl, with a Hasidic sensibility and a Hasidic feeling. And the Rebbe explains to them the difference between Hasidus and Musar, that Musar achieves its end through Shvira, through breaking the negative, and through creating a distance between yourself and what it is that you're breaking away from, whereas Hasidus accomplishes the same thing in a way of Kiruv and Hamshach, by drawing the thing near. Afterwards, the Rebbe said to the girls that and I'm thinking, reading this now, and we've been doing this in Bishruvka different ways, in one form or another, for over 25 years, and how much more true this is now than it ever was. The Rebbe says that the time we are in is a very difficult one for Jewish men, especially for Jewish women and girls. The epidemic winds are blowing all kinds of foreign things that Jewish children could really do without. And it's having not such a good effect. And we hope that the study of Hasidus will be able to hold the equilibrium in the Jewish society. Afterwards, the Rebbe says to the girls, I want to repeat to you a verse that a Rebbe once said to a group of parents when he made a farbrengen with them about the chinuch of their children. Does not identify where the verse comes from. And these are more or less the Rebbe's words. That Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon, in the book of Mishlei, calls the great Jewish woman Eshes Chayil. What is Eshes Chayil? We call it the woman of valor. And the Rebbe says, Afrui was hat Kraft, a woman who is brave, who is courageous. Why does Shlomo HaMelech use this title to describe the ultimately great Jewish woman? The word Chayil is not usually associated in Torah with the woman. And this is the reason why, because if you go through the Eshes Chayil, you come to the last line, and there it says, Sheker hachein vehevel hayofi, Isha yiras Hashem hitis halo. And we all know the meaning of that. And the Rebbe said, there's another way to look at this. There will come a time in history when Sheker hachein, what will find favor in the eyes of people? Sheker, falseness. Vehevel hayofi, what will people consider beautiful? Things of hevel, things of folly, nonsense, silly stuff, worthless stuff. At that time, the Jewish society will be very much affected. But don't give up, because how do we know how negatively it will be affected? Sheker hachein vehevel hayofi, Isha yiras Hashem hitis halo. A God-fearing woman, if there will be such a thing at such a time in history, will be tishalo. In Hebrew, lehalel means to praise, but leholel means to mock. If there will be such a thing as a God-fearing woman, she will be mocked. But don't underestimate the greatness of the Jewish woman. Shlomo HaMelech tells us in the next line, the final line of Eshes Chayil, Tenula mi pri yadeha, v'halaluha b'sha'arim ma'aseha. Give to the woman from the fruit of her hand, and let her deeds laud her at the gate. Ladies, the Rebbe says, take the first letter of each of these four words, Tnu, tough, give. La, to her, mipri, mem, yadeha, her hands. These four letters, if you change around their order, they spell the word Tilin. Don't underestimate, these are the Rebbe's words exactly in Yiddish, the need to educate a Jewish daughter. Because the only one in the world, in such a society, who could raise what we call atilimid. You know what atilimid is? Atilimid are the Yidden that we read about in the stories of the Baal Shem Tov, the Yidden who had such profound emunah and such tmimus, such wholesomeness, such integrity and such sincerity that nothing in the world could shake them. Who could raise such a child in a time like ours? This is in the hand of the Jewish woman. So this is what the Rebbe told the girls. But we always know that Moshe Rabbeinu, the Rebbe, these are very practical people. The Rebbe says to the girls, every branch of knowledge gives you a certain, I remember once Dr. Rosen was telling me, he's talking about something and he says, you have to know certain things because knowledge is power. Every branch of knowledge gives you a certain power. The kayach that comes from studying Hasidus, that's true good. But you know what? Since the Chet Eitz Hadas, Ein Tov V'lo Ra. There's no such thing in our world as good that doesn't have mixed into it a little bit of not good. What not good can come from studying Hasidus? Here are the Rebbe's words. Amol is da aheder hamishmas sudi letterus. Sometimes it causes such confidence when we study Hasidus that it can cause young people to lack proper respect for teachers and for parents because it makes us so strong. So the Rebbe addresses the girls and says, if this happens to any of you members of Achos Hatmimin, tut das mir sehr weh. It hurts me very, very much. Die was willen stehen in a guten Matzav, if you want me to think well of you, you have to strengthen your derech eretz for your parents and for your teachers. When the Rebbe concluded his words, a girl got up. It mentions her name. I don't remember it, even though I read it a few times today. And she thanked the Rebbe for making Achos Hatmimin, which has brought good fruits up until now, and which will, Emirtza Hashem, bring more good fruits. She blesses the Rebbe that he should have Friedrich Rebbe was very not well at this point, physically, that the Rebbe should have a refuah shlema in the schus of establishing Achos Hatmimin, and she wishes the Rebbe a good journey. And the Rebbe responds by giving a bracha to all the girls that they should be well. And then he says these unbelievable words. I want that your relationship with me should be like children towards their very own parents. Because I consider anyone who is connected to me like my very own child. So this is just a little bit of the insight into this group of girls who were supposed to study Hasidus. Tragically, this group perished when the Nazis came into Riga. But we do find letters where the Rebbe, I guess it was a little bit earlier, or maybe in places where there were survivors in Riga, nobody survived, only those who have escaped, where the Rebbe writes to different individuals, I have not heard anything about you from the Mashpiyah in the last period of time. Is it because you have gotten married? And if the girls have gotten married, whom did they marry? Where do they live? The interest in every Fabrengen is unbelievable. Many, many years ago, I didn't even know what it was until much later. In the Yiddish Shehem, there was an article in the English section where the girls of Achos no, it wasn't the Yiddish, I'm sorry, where the girls of Achos Hatmimim made a Fabrengen Yutzes Kislev. And they wrote to the previous Rebbe, to Poland, what they did, in whose house it was, how they celebrated, what nigunim they sang, what time they danced, until what time they danced, how they read the story of Yutzes Kislev chapter by chapter, and they signed their names. Now, it's getting late. I just want to share with you a few more thoughts. Some of them I'll leave out. But when you think about this, where did all this start? So, how many of you have read the previous Rebbe's memoirs, Sefer HaZichronos? The Sefer HaZichronos, the memoirs, is an incredible book. The English version is amazing. But I have to look something up in the Yiddish version today because the English one I couldn't find. And I never knew that there was a supplement in the back of Sefer HaZichronos. And I only found out because I want to share with you a thought from the Sikha of the Rebbe, where in one of the footnotes the Rebbe refers us to the story that I was looking for in Sefer HaZichronos, and it took me a long time to find the page. I only reviewed the Sikha later. And there, after the Rebbe tells us where the story is, he says to look in the Haisafis in the back. So it's in volume 2. There are several chapters that trace the ancestry of Rabbi Baruch, the Alter Rebbe's father. And in that ancestry, we discover a grandmother of the Alter Rebbe whose name was Rachel. And you have to read it. I can't give it over in 2 minutes. I'm never as well as it's written, that's for sure. But this Rachel was a very highly educated woman in a time when women were not educated in this manner for whatever reason. When she got married, her husband did not know about her background. Now, in the Haisafis, in the supplement at the back, it's in Hebrew, even though the memoirs are in Yiddish, and it's written over there by the previous Rebbe that traditionally there had always been 2 schools of thought regarding the formal book education of Jewish girls, going all the way back to the time of the Gemara. There were those who felt that it should not be done for whatever reason. There were those who felt that it must be done. They were not the majority. But even those who felt it should not be done, it was not because it's not a good thing to do, but rather because it would not work out well due to the circumstances if you can't immerse yourself and if you can't study. And you read over there how this woman, Rachel, was explaining to her daughter how come men and women are different, and how come Hashem created different things in the world. It's a fascinating thing to read. I don't think it exists in English yet, or maybe I just don't know. Maybe we can learn it another time. In the memoirs itself, but the supplement I never saw. Anyhow, it goes into a whole discussion of creation and all the levels. It's very, very interesting. But the point was that this Rachel had to hide her scholarship from her husband because he came from a different school. She came from followers of the earlier Balei Shem and the Baal Shem Tov, people who had one view, and he came from another view. And because of an incident that happened, she was so well versed in halacha, and they were wearing their gloves, and because there was an Eruv, there are different customs regarding that. And somebody came to tell them on the way home from Shul on Shabbos that the Eruv had broken, and they were in a dilemma. What do they do with the gloves? One of the members of the family had taken Sfarim, and all of a sudden, she was turned to by her, I think it was her father, who said to her, "What's the din?" And you can imagine that her husband thought that his shver was making a very sad joke. And she was very, very embarrassed. You read all about her character. But he said that the men, they know Gemara, but Rachel knows halacha, Shulchan Aruch. She quoted Shulchan Aruch, the book, the part, the line, and she said the din of the gloves, and she said what to do with the books. And she was very embarrassed. Her husband did not know her secret. And she wondered what this would do to their marriage. And she had good reason to wonder. He was very, very upset. Ultimately, of course, it all worked out, and he went along with her. But there's a sikha that the Rebbe spoke, Tafshin Nun. It's one of the last sikhas we have from Parshas Emor. It was a week before the Neshei Chabad convention. It was a sikha about women learning. And the Rebbe explains there that women always learn. Maybe not everybody. There were always individuals who learned. And he says, like the story my shver tells in the memoirs, and as it's known, my shver, the way he educated his own daughters. So our rebbetzins were all very highly educated people. In terms of knowing everything a Jewish woman has to know, and way beyond. And in this sikha, the Rebbe explains that women today must study Torah. And he brings all kinds of interesting sources. There's no time now, from the Shalom, from Shulchan Aruch, and from Gemara. And he answers those questions of those people who say that the Gemara says that women can't handle it, and all kinds of things like that. That has to be seen in that proper context. But one of the things that's so fascinating is the Rebbe explains over there that when the Gemara says that it will make them sly and shrewd, not the Jewish view of being a feminine person, the Rebbe says In our world, when the armonious, the slyness, and the smartness, and whatever word you, sophistication, whatever you want to call it, has penetrated into every single corner, and every girl, every Jewish girl gets this anyhow, shouldn't it be that she should get it from our Torah? And even though it's become standard for Jewish girls to go study in schools, the Sarashtir and Beis Yaakov, and it's become in even the communities who did not study from books, some Hasidic communities, today they've also changed. The world is different. And the Rebbe says, even though the reason that we had to start formal education for girls is because the generations have become less, on the other hand, look how much more Torah. The Rebbe explains that when you understand what you do it with so much more passion. How knowing something in Torah increases one's yiras shamayim. It's just fascinating. Everybody has to study. Mrs. Markovsky, I'm sure, maybe already brought it in. I don't know. Just want to share two more interesting details. In the Rebbe's Rishimas, there was a Rishima from 1941 or 1942 that the Rebbe wrote when Beis Rivka was being established. It was, I guess, notes of a speech. I don't know if it was ever said or not, but it was printed. Rabbi Kalmanson used to teach it in Beis Rivka. And over there, our Rebbe, before he's Rebbe, writes these words, that people will come and say, we don't need a Beis Rivka, we don't need schools like this, because we don't need our daughters to be rebbetzens. This is America in early 1940. They have to understand that the purpose of a school for girls is not to create rebbetzens. There's one purpose only, that the girls should remain Jewish daughters, who in turn will be able to impart it to the next generation. In many letters, the Rebbe writes that the purpose of learning used to be to acquire knowledge. Today, the purpose of studying Torah is to ensure that one will remain a Jew. I think I'm going to stop. There are a few more things, but it's getting late. In that Sikha, the Rebbe says, very, very interesting, in Chumash we are taught, when it says, the Sikha was at Parshas Emor, where Hashem tells Moshe to tell Aaron to teach the Kohanim. And it says, say it to them and say it to them twice. This is a very famous explanation, that the older ones or those in authority should teach the younger ones. They have to teach it to them, and they have to teach it to others. The words that are quoted from the Gemara is lahazhir gedolim al haktanim, to make sure that those in authority, the parents, the teachers, the kohanim, should forewarn those who are less in terms of learning. Here again, you see the beauty of the light. Lahazhir is from the same word as the word Zohar, light. The purpose of teaching Torah to another is to bring out the light in them. And then it turns it around and says, why don't we read it like we have in the pasuk that heralds the coming of Mashiach, that Eliyahu will come, veheshiv leiv avos al banim, that he will reconcile the hearts of the parents and the children. He will fix over this gap that exists between the generations. The Rebbe indicates, in our time, like you said, lahazir gdolim al yedei haktanim, that the younger ones, the smaller ones in our world will bring out the light of the neshama of their elders. The younger people will teach and inspire their parents and their grandparents. And I'll conclude with the vart I found in a letter of the previous Rebbe about Hasidic education. The Rebbe says it's all about light. The world says that when it's very light, you can see all the flaws. You walk into a room and it's brightly lit, you see the mess, you can see the dirt. It's a problem. Chassidim say that when it's very light, you can see the beauty of another person. And that's what chinuch is all about, being that it's now Aseret Yemei Tshuva. I'll conclude, and whatever I left out, maybe we'll do another time. It's endless. Chazal say, Pischuli Pesach kechudo shel machat. Open for me a door like the sharp point of a needle. Vani eftach lachem kepischo shel ulam. And I will open for you like the grand doors of the ulam, of the grand chambers in the Beis HaMikdash. So we have a question. Our Rebbe teaches us. Why does it, when it says, when it wants to say make a small opening, why does it say kechudo shel machat, like the sharp point of a needle? There's so many tiny things. A point? Because what's the purpose of the point of the needle? The purpose of the point of the needle is to penetrate the cloth and to combine two things that are disconnected. And this is what Hashem wants from every single one of us. This is what our learning is supposed to accomplish for us and for all those who learn with us and all those we learn with, because it's not a matter of a teacher and a student. We're all the children of Hashem. We're all Siddim of the Rebbe. We're all dedicated and indebted to rebbetzen Chana and to the Leivik and to all the Rabbeim and to the Eibishter. And the point is, we just have to put that point through the Gashmias, and we have to connect it to the Ruchnias. And then we have the doors of the Beis HaMikdash opening before all of us, where we will see rebbetzen Chana, all the people who went to Macham Chana, and the people who had the schos to help Mrs. Lapkowski to teach there, and the people who had the schos to know all the people, and we all learn from each other. And it should be before the sun rises on Zion Tishrei. A Gmar Simcha Teva to everybody.
Thank you. That was beyond magnificent. Thank you.
Please don't leave. There's a slideshow now of new and exciting things that we're planning.